Welcome to the Conscious Combat Club, trauma-informed martial arts by women, for women. I'm your host Georgia, and I cannot wait to go on this journey with you. Please note that some listeners might find this content distressing. Take care, connect with your support networks, and refer to the organisations in the show notes below. This episode features my incredible new friend, Kenisha Coy. Kenisha is a martial artist by way of Taekwondo who is passionate especially about breaking and combines board breaking with art therapy in a way that you are going to love learning about. Kenisha is a PhD candidate researching the space of martial arts, bystanders, intersectionality, and the role that board breaking and trauma-informed practice might have in connecting that space in an absolutely beautiful way. You're going to love learning more about that, as well as Kenisha's experience as a member of the BIPOC community in martial arts, as well as conversations around power, around the role of martial arts in our lives, around the spectrum of martial arts and the ways that we show up as individuals and as part of community. So, Kenisha, can you tell us firstly what brings you to the wonderful world of martial arts?
First, I want to say thank you for having me, and I'm just encouraged and excited to be talking to you, you trailblazer, also known as Georgia. Okay, seriously. Martial arts for me, I always loved watching the movies and would take the moves with my cousins. I'm one of the few female cousins amongst a lot of males, and would always imitate them as a child. And I had the opportunity to start training in 2001. I moved from, I live in the United States, and I lived in Massachusetts at the time, and I moved to Florida and started training, and I just fell in love with it. It was, I trained in Taekwondo, and it's more of the WT system. I've started to venture out into other systems though. So I've been learning a few ITF forms, and even interacting with martial artists who are in Taekwondo and other disciplines as well. Just learning what they do, because I think I do believe that we should be more inclusive instead of exclusive. So that's one of the things I love about martial arts that I've encountered often, though not always. So when I was training, I started working at the same place that I was training. I started driving the buses and, going out and flyering, because that's what we did back then. And it got me talking to a lot of people. And I was starting to, with a person that I was around mostly, we got into doing a lot of competitions, and I wanted to be a better fighter. And I think as many learn that when you're training long enough, you transition from being a fighter to understanding that it's not about the fighting, it's sparring. And then that transition from fighting to sparring to self-protection, you learn really to respect what you're doing, because you can actually really hurt somebody. So I was competing in sparring, and I heard something across like the room, and it was this odd yell. It was between a yelp and a grunt. And it was just like, what is going on over there? And I just walked over there because that's me. And I saw people breaking things, and I was just like, whoa, what is this? And I saw someone who I admire. At the time, he wasn't master, but he's now master, Nick Zambri. He was breaking concrete and bricks, and he was on top of nails. And I'm like, I think I just fell in love. So for me, it was like, what is this odd thing that you have me in? And I've seen breaking because it's one of the training domains that we have in Taekwondo, but I never saw it like that. And that's what had me fall in love that day and continuously. I love breaking.
That is so freaking cool. I think everybody has a memory like that. For me, I can remember I must have been maybe 15. So I've been training for a few years. And at a tournament, we had a couple of guys visiting from Russia, and they were doing ice breaking. And it was not just like, a little sheet of ice, it was like huge blocks of ice where like bits of it flew off and like hit people, and I just couldn't believe that they were breaking that. I never have attempted to break ice. Then I didn't watch it and be like, yes, that's going to be me. I was like, oh, God, what am I doing?
I think there's a lot of whimsy in all of us martial artists anyway, because the things that we're led to, like, ow, that hurts so good. You know what I mean? Who says that? I mean, really? Yeah. But a lot of us, we get it. And you get to kind of also delineate what pain is, because not all pain is the same. So it's very much like, okay, well, that was a good pain. Like, I'm pushing it, and that's okay. And I'm pushing it in a way that I don't think is great. So a breaking, I think that there's a metaphorical as well as a literal connection. And I just got connected to that, and the emotional connection that some days you're going to be hitting that material and it's not going to break. You can be as strong, as skilled, and sometimes, I mean, you have to put that discipline in regularly. And there are days when it feels like it's almost effortless. Almost. I think there's always effort, but it's not necessarily like, oh my goodness, so hard. And I think you get to respect the hard of it. And the people I found in the breaking community, for the most part, have been very welcoming. They're inviting to a lot of different things. I'm weird, I know that, and I'm not. I'm weird in that I like to bring art to what I do. So, I can actually show you. I'll show you at a different time or whenever is appropriate. I draw on boards. I do different types of art representation, and I connect it to a message and a story. So, it's not your regular breaking story, but I call it break story because I'm trying to help connect breaking and mental health. And the community has been really welcoming to that. But it's also, it's work. So there are things that I need to work on. Like I need to work on my timing. I need to work on, so it's always something to keep in the forefront of your mind. But it's also breaking down stigma. It can be anyway. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I have so many areas that I would love to hover on. I adore this concept of putting art onto a board and then breaking it. It's like the literal representation of something that we do in my family, where we'll, if there's something that is like a recurring thought that we can't quite break through, or if there is, an idea or something that we're really struggling with, is that we'll put it in a glass jar and break it, or we'll write it on a piece of paper and set it on fire, but not literally, just in our mind's eye. And you're doing it literally onto the board. So I'm like, yes.
Well, this is one of them. I was coming up with a story, so I called it Break Story. And I was thinking of being able to talk about BIPOC representation and sometimes lack thereof within the world of martial arts. And then, there's other things like breaking through the binary of boards. This is not my best, but I like to incorporate.
Explain out loud, just for those who aren't watching, because a lot of folks will be just listening to this podcast.
Sure. So what I'm showing, Georgia, are boards that are typical sizes at breaking tournaments. And what I've done is I started getting into this because I've been in so many tournaments, and they seem to, not all of them, but they seem to be very much the same. And that gets very, very boring, in my opinion. So Master Elton Trower, rest in peace, he told me back in 2006, 2007, he encouraged me to be different. And And he said, you're going to be the future of breaking, not because of the strength, because you're strong, but because of the creativity. And you might be bringing that in a different way. And I want you to continue to do that. And it was a great honor to hear that from somebody who was so well esteemed and just a really nice guy. And it let me see that even though we have muscles, even though muscles and we can be physically strong, you can be emotionally strong. And that emotional strength can extend to being kind. So, and vulnerable. So I competed that year, and then I didn't compete again for years after that. Um, and I came back in 2010. I competed, and then 2021 was when I started getting back into martial arts again and breaking. And I figured, well, if I'm going to come back, I'm going to bring me. So the board that I'm showing you now, Georgia, is I like superheroes, and I'm definitely a comic books fan, and more of, your Marvel than DC, but that's fine. And what you have here is your Black Panther. And I also have, one I showed before was Spider-Man. And I create a story within 2 to 3 minutes, and I'm breaking through um, regarding one topic. And I just think it's important to be able to have it visceral, but also emotively connective. And it's one of the things I love about breaking.
It's incredible. I'm so about this. One day now I'm even more motivated to like get to the States or get you here so that we can like make this into a session. I'm so down for this.
I have some ideas. I'll tell you when we're not recording.
Yes. Okay. Yes, please. I want to hover around the inclusivity piece because you've touched on it a few times in a few different realms as well too. And I'm quite curious about what you see in the parallels and maybe not parallels between, for example, the different fractions within, your experience as Taekwondo, but, across all martial arts, there are splits where, some fractions don't talk to other fractions, and we have these like political divides within the styles. In what ways do you see those experiences being mirrored in experiences as a person of color or for, queer communities or other minorities in terms of inclusivity?
Wow. Thank you for even asking that question. I think it's a brave question to ask because the answers aren't necessarily as packaged pretty. I think that it's necessary to ask those questions and be willing to hear the answers of just different people, because we all have different experiences. And I think we're in a society now that is so polarized to the point of, I think this, and if you don't think like me, then you're wrong. And it extends to different being deficit, but different doesn't have to be deficit. It's distinctive, if anything. So it's a weird time, but I think it's also, this time provides opportunity in that there are traditional martial artists and there are those who don't subscribe necessarily to those specific traditions. It doesn't make them any less martial artists. To borrow from Grandmaster Junri, also rest in peace, I respected this martial artist so deeply. He came up with some really interesting concepts. And I mean, what was it? Fight for Might. He did martial ballet Exodus. He did a form to Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. People look at his work even now and they're like, well, that's not martial arts. And I've seen different columns, different sections in comment sections where they are just, no, that's not martial arts. That's not what I want to do. And I'm like, well, think about what you just said. It is martial arts, even if that's not what you want to do. So why put it in this binary space of, oh, it's absolutism, it's not being martial arts? Just because you don't identify with it doesn't mean that it doesn't have its own identity. And then going into even deeper inclusivity, it's an odd thing. And for me anyway, it correlates with the question of martial arts saving my own life. I have felt included by very specific martial artists. And it's not even color constructed, because that also, sometimes people assume, oh, well, Black people accepted you because you're Black. I'm like, no, I've been accepted by persons who have less melanin. Thank you. Let's not assume, again, the binary. But I've also been rejected. Like with breaking and connecting art, it's like, oh, well, that's not what creative breaking in is. I'm like, well, it's creative. I'm breaking. I think it is. And other people apparently agree. So, as a woman who identifies as a part of her Black identity and of the African diaspora, I do recognize that there are different sections, different martial artists who don't necessarily subscribe to me being in their dojos, their dojans, their training centers and spaces. You know, I've had that happen where it's like, oh, well, you're a woman. Oh, well, you're one of those, you're an other. And it's so interesting to me because martial arts is about being diverse within tradition as well as being an alternative practice. You know, so it's very much odd when people try to place their identity and their lack of knowledge onto others, and in this case myself, because I'm speaking about my experience, and then act like I and others should subscribe to that. Like, no, I'm not going to, and I'm not ever going to. And it's then where I use martial arts, and even more specifically breaking, but forms, because I think about how people formulate the stories that are manifesting in their mind, and then they perpetuate that into others. I think there's opportunities if people are willing to learn from others, but also it's to not get stymied by those containers that have been enslaved by those people, not to get caught up in that. Because, I mean, so many people love to quote Bruce Lee, but they don't recognize that he was an outsider when he was bringing martial arts here. They don't recognize the hardships that he went through. And it's great to look back, I mean, now and be like, oh, Bruce Lee was so great. But he suffered a lot of prejudice. He suffered a lot of ignorance, and he was placed in those spaces that were not welcoming. So I bring that all back into focus of being identifying with BIPOC community, and having that placed upon me like, oh, well, you're less than. Like, no, I'm not. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean that my value doesn't exist. So, and that's another thing that martial arts, I think, is really, it can be great, but also can be lonely. I've been able to be around people, ironically, I never expected this to happen. Martial artists who are, who use this for trauma-informed communities and helping communities. This is almost like a breath of fresh air. Not that I'm ever wanting there to be trauma in the world, but as much as I love martial arts, I have had very specific trauma incidents that have happened that have been connected. And knowing now that there is this community that's growing, that's using trauma responsive practices to help community members, as well as help get healing for themselves, this is something I absolutely am all aboard being a part of. So I hope that answers the question.
It does. And there are so many beautiful things that I want to pull out from that.
Okay.
Towards the end, right, around trauma-informed practice, one thing that I always love to highlight for folks is that in an ideal world, we wouldn't need to use the term trauma-informed. The term we would use would be person-centered, as in, you know, we see the person as the individual with having individual needs, as existing within multiple communities, and bringing those experiences to the way that they show up in our space, and honoring all of that while attempting to not perpetuate any harm, and also tailor to their individuality and celebrate that. That is trauma-informed practice, but currently we really need to lead with the term trauma, because undoing the work of the harm that is still currently existing in our world is first and foremost. But I love, for example, the work of Adrienne Marie Brown in talking about, you know, how important it is that we don't lose sight of the good thing that we're working towards. You know, that we are not just looking to
undo harms, because and then what? We're not always just fighting against negativity. We're also looking to step into more pleasure, more joy, more positivity into our lives. And trauma-informed practice is really like a sort of segue into that space. But we're keeping sight of that we're not just undoing damage, because at that point, what you get to the end of your life, or you get to the end of your martial arts career, if you see an end, or whatever that practice looks like or process looks like, and it's like, for what? For what? Why are we healing if it's not to experience more beautiful things? Just healing for the sake of healing. And I do think a lot of that does tend to go on, because understandably we get stuck within seeing the injustice, rather than seeing why we're trying to fight the injustice in the first place.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, that was so awesomely stated. Yeah. You have to have a focus, I think, in anything of what is your why. And when I'm working with clients who have gone through, because I work with largely, but not solely, persons who have been affected by SDV. So that's sexual assault, that's child abuse, that's domestic violence, intimate partner violence. And it's being able to have regular conversations of what is the other side. And that's one of the reasons why, and I'm so grateful you brought it up. That's why I use I use comic books and Marvel characters, because sometimes, well, more often than not, you lose your voice when you've been a victim to these types of traumas. And it could be argued, if you've had intergenerational and complex trauma, then you might not even be acquainted with your voice. So by the time we're interacting, you're so used to being in an identified role, but you don't know what your actual role is. So it's very important, and I think martial arts is excellent in being able to help with that. Let's find out what your voice, where does your voice go? Actually, let's find out what you want your voice to sound like. Who do you want to be? And let's create a character and connect you with that character. And that character doesn't have to be foreign. And as they're getting stronger within their martial arts practice, they're getting stronger within their character, and that voice starts to come out and they start to inhabit that voice. So it's like, well, don't get married to the pain. Get married to the promise of who your best self can actually be, and start to get a picture of that. And that picture starts to grow. And then as it continues, that pain, because I think there's always an aspect that remembers. Was it Vander Kolk book, the body keeps
the score? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. It's always there to a degree, but as you're healing, it shifts. And even having a conversation about forgiveness, I try to, with other practitioners as well, invite the space that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, but it does mean being able to let go in a way that makes sense to you. You're not going to probably be able to let go immediately, but this is intentional work, because this is life work. And as you are working towards that best healed self, you're not going to necessarily be so attached to what has happened. It doesn't mean that you're ignoring what happened, but it does mean that you're clinging onto a new vision. So I just resonate with what you said, because we can't just focus on the pain, because then we get more pain.
Yes. And I love this piece around being able to try on characters. I think we're always playing characters, right? Like, my podcasting self is different to the self that I am when I'm with my parents, to when I'm with clients, to when I'm with friends, my martial arts self. Those are all characters that I'm playing to an extent, and they do bleed into each other. And that's what I notice across martial arts spaces, both with clients of mine and also with friends that I have who don't practice in trauma-informed spaces, is that because they get to play the confident character in martial arts, that starts to seep over into other areas of their life. And again, I probably can barely get through an episode without talking about how much we are experiential beings. So it does me no good to tell you, like, be confident, play a confident character in your mind if you can't actually imagine that in real life. But if you get to do that in a setting, whatever it is, whether it's in martial arts or, you know, some other setting, then you've actually got proof, and you don't need to trick your mind into believing that it's possible because you have concrete evidence that it is possible.
I love that you just said like everything about that. There's an exercise I've done with some youth I've been working with, because they are under the interesting impression that when you get to be an adult, or an adult, as some of them like to say, and I'm like, hey, rock however you say it is fine, that you get to do anything that you want. I'm like, you guys, I'm technically an adult. I don't get to do everything I want. They're like, yes, you do, ma'am. Yes, you do. I'm like, okay. And they're like, you know, you get to say whatever you want. You get to be whatever you want. I'm like, well, I get to live the life that I would like to, but within that come responsibilities. And how I'm linking it to what you just said, I call them my sweethearts, was saying, Miss, people are so fake because they say one thing and they do another. And I'm like, well, some people can be hypocrites and some people can be fake, but we don't know what's going on within that. So I was talking to them about basketball games, because we're trying to get them out and doing more things. I'm like, well, would you use your basketball voice in the same way as you would use your voice in church? It's like, no. I'm like, you're right. That was so obnoxious. No, you would not do that. So does that mean that you're being fake? He's like, oh, miss. I'm like, right. So because you're using your basketball voice at a basketball game and you go to church and you use a lower tone, it doesn't mean that you're fake. It means that you're showing up in a different way. So it could be that that person is being fake, or it could be that you're seeing a side that you just don't recognize. Let's give the person grace. And if it does produce the pattern of them being fake, then handle it. Sometimes by not handling it. Sometimes it really depends, but don't just assign them the labeling that they're being fake, because we don't know what they're going through, just like they don't know what you're going through. And that really might be who they needed to show up at that day, at that time, in order to survive. So I think it's like being able to understand that there's different, Kimberly Crenshaw, she's the one who coined intersectionality. I think that especially as martial artists, we're supposed to show up as being, these strong beings. But I think maybe we need to reframe what strong and strength actually mean. You know, we could be physically strong and emotionally weak. And what does emotionally weak actually mean? You know, being vulnerable doesn't mean that you're less than. If anything, that's a different type of strength. But we're not necessarily, as societally, we're not pushing that. So I think as martial artists, it's one of our responsibilities to be able to show up in those spaces and be like, yeah, physically, we're as strong as we can be, emotionally, that too, and have spaces where people can show up and be vulnerable. And if they need to cry, and this is males, absolutely, breaking down those toxic masculine barriers, so then they can be better allies. And then we can be also better allies in accepting that, hey, I don't know what it means to be a man. Quite frankly, I don't want to. I like being a woman. But I respect that you are a man, and I want you to be able to be safe in your space. I want transgender persons to be safe in their space. But I don't get to tell you how to occupy your space, just like you shouldn't tell me how to occupy mine. And it's that emotional reciprocity, I think, that if we bring it to martial arts, I think we honestly could change a lot of things that are going on in this world. But we've got to be able to stop looking at, my martial art is better than yours. Like, are you kidding? That's not solving problems.
Not at all. And I love that we're bringing it back to intersectionality, because one of the things that I was wanting to hover on a little bit ago, which is exactly the way that I love having conversations with all of these multiple, beautiful, delicious tangents, is that really the more that I work in this space and the more time that I spend thinking about what are martial arts, the more I think about it as a spectrum, just like I think about almost everything in life as a spectrum. You know, you had a board before about breaking the binary. And I think we think a lot about the gender binary. There are so many binaries that we try to create, and it's almost infinite. because our brains are just little logic making machines that love
Right.
being able to be like, it either is or it isn't. You know, it's very black and white thinking, as opposed to looking at things as a spectrum, you know, on the spectrum of the so-called hard martial arts to the soft martial arts and what that looks like, you know, trauma-informed martial arts to traditional martial arts and what that spectrum looks like. And I talk about that a lot with the coaches that I work with, because there's so much variation between different people. You know, you meet people who you are like, I resonate so much with the way that you step into this space and you create the opportunities for folks to be able to be vulnerable on the mat, to, you know, bring their other identities into this space. Or, you know, the other end of the spectrum would be, you know, whatever the opposite is to that. And there are so many spectrums that are at play at once, that conceptually it doesn't actually fit on a graph model, right? Like you can have one spectrum if you're thinking about just like one area, but as soon as you think about a whole person, well, there are so many spectrums at place, and you know, it's not possible to have all of the spectrums lining up in a way that they intersect, because there's infinite locations on each of those axes where a person could be intersecting. And so then we just become complete individual beings, but also with all of these little like thread ties to each other in all of these wonderful, like slightly different, slightly similar ways. And that becomes really complex to think about. And that, I think, is the difficult work that, you know, for whatever reason, we've put in the too hard basket, I think, up until now. And now there are more and more change makers, such as yourself, who are like, actually, how could we think about this differently?
I think, but to your point, thank you. And following in your footsteps, because I think that sometimes we're put in these positions to change because in a way we see that there isn't any alternative, you know. So this year has been one of my hardest academic years for sure, and emotional, but it's also been hugely awakening. And a part of that was even finding out that trauma responsive martial arts actually exists. I never knew that this was out there. I just thought I was taking my qualitative methods research class, and I needed a project. And the instructor, who is also a martial artist, knows that I love it. And she also knew that I was taking a break. So I took a break from May 21 to present-ish martial arts, because I was like, okay, what do I do in this space? I want to be in martial arts, but I saw some trauma tales and tie-ins that I didn't want to be connected to. And I really wasn't sure where I fit in this. I knew I didn't want to leave martial arts alone, but I also didn't know what was next. So, like, okay, I guess I'm going to use this year to figure that out. But I also am in school. And I didn't expect the two to come together how they did, but they did. So my project was to investigate martial arts. And I was stating martial arts, it has connections to mental health advocacy. And there are plenty of articles that speak to this, but they speak about it in very broad ways. So I was looking for more specific information, more specific research. And I started thinking, is there trauma-informed martial arts? And I just typed that in, and there it was. I'm like, oh my gosh. I was shouting right in my living room. My neighbors probably thought I was crazy. That's fine. But I made it a chart of as many as I could. And I contacted 32. Out of 32, I really only had one negative situation. And it wasn't because that person was even trauma informed in any way. It was a person who, so linked to some of what you were saying, they saw martial arts in one way. And anybody who was trying to have martial arts be in any other way, they were wrong. And he told me that martial arts is actually violent, and anybody who tries to say that it isn't is wrong. I'm like, okay, well, thank you for having the time to talk with me. But it was weird, but that's what it was. So reaching out to everyone else, they were extraordinarily welcoming, supportive, I started finding out that, oh my goodness, there's academic pursuits within martial arts. Hello and yum. I mean, so
Yes.
it led me to you, and I'm like, oh my gosh. As we know, Dr. George Jennings has been he is so great about wanting to connect people. And I talked to him about something that I'm starting, which I'm calling MAM, Martial Arts Absolutely Matters, and being able to connect martial arts and healing and it's just, this community has been extremely supportive. And the other side of that, because, as martial artists, we know about balance, we know the yin and yang, is the people, many that I spoke to, they have gone through a significant traumas. Many of them, unfortunately, have had some type of assault. There's been abuse. I myself have survived child abuse and sexual assault. And it's to a point where I think this resonates, especially, well, definitely among the people I've talked to. We don't want anybody to ever go through any of these situations. And because of our own healing journey and process, we know that we can contribute to our communities, to this world, by letting people know what happened to you was not okay. It should have never happened. And what we're going to do is be able to promote healthy well-being and not get stuck in our pain. So these are active choices. Some days look better than others. Other days are like, oh, I might not want to get out of bed. This might be a life practice right here. But for the most part, it's very much of, I'm making the choice and you're making the choice. And we are actively making these choices because almost in a way, we have no other choice. And of course, we have the choice to not, but it doesn't really feel like a choice.
I love how much you keep coming back to choice and voice, right? Such a central trauma-informed principle. It really underpins, all trauma-informed practice because, I love, there's a quote in David Emerson's book about trauma-sensitive yoga, which is that trauma is by definition the absence of choice,
Yep.
right? And looking to restore that into somebody's life, again, by experience, is no small thing. Like, it seems like such a small thing just to give people choices. And especially in martial arts settings where, you're raised to just say yes or say us or, whatever the word is in your style. And there's not even a no option. It is just like, yes, and I will push myself no matter what, because you're the instructor and I am the student. And when we flip that, it's like, it's a huge, huge difference. And like the value of that cannot be understated, I think.
Truth. So much truth in that. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And it's also, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
No, I was just thinking about the choice with the voice. It's also allowing people, and I'm speaking within a martial arts context, allowing our training supporters know how to do that with us. Because something I noticed at a conference with Dr. Jennings, one, there were more women who were presenting than I've ever seen at an academic conference and at an academic martial arts conference. It just blew me away. The women were sharing their stories that involved trauma, and every single one, which I appreciated what you also touched on, it wasn't stuck in the pain. And it was talking about how they were moving forward with purpose. What I noticed also, though, were some of the men in the space, actually almost everyone, they were so considerate and kind. And it wasn't about pitying. It was about, this should have never happened to you. How can I show up and be there for you? And I think that comes with a certain internal integrity and a confidence that it doesn't matter how big your outer muscles are. It's like, no, I know that this is wrong. And not only do I know that it's wrong, I'm speaking up and out about that. That's a choice. Because I don't know, you've probably been in this, but we watch people bystand things that are horrible. And it's just like, no, stand up for that person. They need your voice. And I think one of the things that we can do, and something I'm working on within my doctoral work, is creating spaces of bystander intervention. So then we can support the supporters, help them be better supporters, as well as helping people who have no idea about martial arts. How do we help them learn from a mental health side of awareness of, well, I'm in spaces where I'm uncomfortable. How do I speak up? I might not even need to speak up here. Maybe I'm calling for help. Understanding that calling for help doesn't mean that you lack. If anything, that's a strength. Breaking down the stigma of, oh, well, I'm a snitch. It's like, no, if you're helping another person, you're helping humanity. If you're helping humanity, you're helping our collective narrative. If you're helping our collective narrative, then we're all healthy together. But that always comes back to choice and
Yes.
using your voice in a way.
There are so many listeners to this show who will really resonate with that. And one of the topics that we talk about a lot is how to change the culture within your gym. Because it's very easy to say, vote with your wallet. And, if the space that you're training in doesn't align with your values and you're seeing things that, are wrong, then leave.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of value in that. And at some point, you might have to do that. I personally did that this year where I could no longer tolerate being in the space. But I have the huge privilege to be able to do that because I live in a major city and there are many options for different gyms that I can train at across different styles,
Sure.
and even within each style, right? So if I'm trying to look for a new gym of the same martial art, it's going to be very easy for me to do that. I even have the option to shop around and get a sense for where am I going to start committing my time to. But that's not the case across the world. Depending on where you live, sometimes you actually do need to be the change maker and change culture. And we get a lot of questions about that from folks who listen to this show who are wondering, I'm seeing racism in the space that I train at. I'm seeing homophobia. I'm seeing transphobia. How can I change the culture when I don't own the gym? I'm just one person. What do you think?
Right.
It's a big question.
It's a powerful question. It is a big question. Congratulations on your choice, by the way, because I don't know, obviously, all the ins and outs, but I know from my own perspective that when you leave a situation, it's not easy. It takes a lot of thought and it takes a lot of deliberate thought. So I think sometimes, especially as martial artists, because our culture is to push. And there's certain loyalty, quote unquote, tied into that. It's like you need to be loyal. And I used to look at loyalty because I am by my own nature a very loyal person. Especially if I love you, if I believe in you, it is extraordinarily hard for me to leave you. I had some situations though that I've seen where I've been loyal to a person and they haven't been loyal. So then I was continuously in these hurt type of situations. And I started to, like within the last 15 years, reframe loyalty. And it's being loyal to a principle as opposed to a person. So within being loyal to the principle, it's okay, is this person adhering to integrity? Not telling me that you're integritous, but are you actually subscribing? And then are the patterns of your life aligning with what you're saying? Because so many people like to say words don't mean anything. And I'm like, well, I bet you if you got a call that said you won $1 million, those words would mean a lot. So it's not that words don't mean anything. It's empty words followed by lack of action that don't mean anything. So following the principle, looking at the patterns, something I think, because I think, especially out of my doctoral work, it's coming, don't discount the data. And data isn't only science by binary numbers. It's if a person keeps leaving you out in the lurch and then they come back, oh, you just abandoned me. No, you abandoned that person, but they gave you the scissors to cut them off. So it wasn't you that cut them off. They gave you, because of the data, they gave you the information you needed to cut them off. So there's nothing wrong with that. Doing it that way, I think it helps. I think sometimes, and it's, for me, it was embarrassing, but it's also being real with yourself. Why are you in certain relationships? Sometimes we're in relationships because we want to feel good, but there's nothing wrong with that, right? We all want to belong. We all want to be loved. And sometimes we're in relationships where that person showed you who they are. Maya Angelou, the late Maya Angelou, she was known to say, when a person shows you who they are, believe them. And so many, admittedly, I hear this more from women, we're nurturers. I think that's just because of how science has created us in terms of our limbic system being larger. And that's, probably a different conversation, but we are more often nurturers, and we're trying to stay in and stick in. And if anyone comes into your space and they disrespect your space, your heart space, your mental space, your standards, your requirements. This is not, my love is going to save this person. No, because nobody's love is ever going to save a toxic person. They have got to want to save themselves. So it's looking at the standard that has been set in place. And if that person, that group, that situation is being abusive to that, you have your data. And now it's for you to act upon that data. So let's use racism, actually any ism really. It's okay. I hear a person talking negatively. I hear a person talking about another person's ethnicity, their gender, their smelly feet. I mean, it might seem really low, but it's like people are sensitive, and you don't want to put a person in a space that disrespects their dignity. So I think, if anything, if you ever hear somebody being disrespected, stand with that person. Because people tend to laugh it off, like, oh, I didn't mean anything. I would ask that person, if you ever were able to get one-on-one time with them, are they okay? And ask them how they would like to be supported. Because there are also spaces and places where people don't want to have anybody say anything because they feel like it makes them be conspicuous, and understandable. But I think being able to even stand up, and if that person doesn't want to be the center of that, you can still speak up about the principle, what that person is doing. So as you can see, I have curly hair, and sometimes it is just out and loud and sometimes it's not. And I've had a person say, oh, well, why don't you go back to the country where you came from? Like, well, I came from America, so but we're talking about ethnically. And before I could even say something, another martial artist was like, well, that was rude, and her hair is beautiful, but even if it wasn't, you shouldn't have said that. I didn't even have to say anything, and I was geared up to do that, and I appreciated that. And then they came to me later and they asked, hey, was that okay? Did I overstep? I'm like, no, I appreciate that. What that did for me was it helped me feel less alone. And I'm capable of speaking out because I've had to so often, but it let me know that I wasn't in that experience by myself. It also put that person who made that comment on notice. What you did is not okay. And while they tried to laugh it off, like, well, y'all just need to learn how to take a joke. Well, a joke is only really, it constitutes as funny when all parties are showing up within that specific entertainment. And it wasn't entertaining. So check yourself. So they didn't say anything else about my hair. They did other things because that was them, but I also found out that they were just displaying their insecurity. I did stop going to that location, but I still connect with a person who talked about my hair in a positive way. So.
Yes, absolutely. I think we kind of undervalue those little actions, which are not little, really. They're quite big, and whether or not you remain in the space to see what happens, just as like microaggressions accumulate over time, I think micro kindnesses also accumulate over time, and eventually, you might not see the change in that space, and you're still well within your right to leave, always. But that might just be the straw that builds the camel's back into, actual change within that space. It might not, but it might.
I love that you said that. And I will quote you on your micro kindness. I say micro successes because I think it's important for us to build on our successes. I've never heard micro kindness. I love that. So I will be citing you. Where I live, it's rural-ish, And I've had, people just make comments about my color. And to your point, I'm working on emotional resiliency, and I don't in any way mean emotional resilience means that you have to take abuse. Abuse should not ever be tolerated. What I'm doing is trying to actively notice when people are doing this, the why. And sometimes we won't really get to the full why, but so in this one particular case, I noticed that they were talking about me and my color, and like, oh, well, there's just too much color here and they need to go back to where they came from, like stuff like that. And they were waiting for a reaction and I didn't give them one. So then they were talking louder. So then they were talking so loud that other people in other offices were coming out and like, what are they talking about? And then they had to quiet themselves. Now, I will tell you, my inner voice was like, I really want to go over there and smash your head. But I was like, okay, Kenisha, you're not going to do that because that's the reaction that they want. And I could see that by me not saying anything to them and not engaging, that was angering them. So that was kind of like a light within myself, like, okay, so you're saying this because you're wanting me to react in a negative way. I'm not going to give in to that. So that was about 5 years ago. And just employing a scripture of, killing a person with kindness. Of course, my imagination wanted to kill in other ways, but I didn't, obviously. So we're 5 years now. And every time I go into this office, these two people come from around their desk to say hello. They have apologized, like they apologized 2 years ago. And one of them shared a story that it doesn't make it right, but I understand in part that they had a hard issue with somebody of color and so forth and on. I'm like, well, just because you had an issue with somebody, right, exactly. It doesn't mean that you get to do that with everybody else. But I did accept their apology. Does it mean that we're going to go and hold hands and sing Kumbaya? Absolutely not. Does it mean that I'm going to invite them into my home? Probably not. But it does mean that I see that work in progress in me being in this area. I'm trying to use my martial arts skills, my background in spirituality, my belief in God. I'm not a traditional Christian, I guess, but I'm one that believes in love and promoting positivity and wellness. But I'm also, it's interesting that people think that because you're kind, that you kind of won't put your foot in somebody's behind if you need to. And that's the martial artist in me, So it's like, all right, but how do we do this in a way that's constructive and moving the narrative forward, as opposed to, oh, well, you suck because you call me that. And because of course I could have gone there. And then there's some situations where I just had to leave because it just was not safe. I'm like, okay, no story is going to keep me and myself from harm. So it's like you have to pick your battles in a way. But sometimes I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes you really are there to stay. Sometimes there's no other choice. And then there's other times when you're going to make the choice to create the space that you're hoping it can be and hope that people follow suit and it becomes healthier.
Yes.
Makes sense?
It does. It really does. And I think it comes back to what we were talking about earlier around creating characters and how our experiences shape what our characters are capable of doing. And so, if I think about my life, when I was 20, 21, the kinds of things that I would tolerate from men in, martial arts settings were so different to what I would tolerate now.
Right.
And it's not that I blame that like very young person who was, not that she was too young, but just she didn't have any experience at saying no, right? So if you can't do really what you've never done or until you've done it, and it needs to be a slow thing, like you can't just be this huge jump. For some people it might be, but I know for me it was like a slow build up of stepping into like what my values were, what I would stand for, what I wouldn't stand for, and also just realizing that like you're allowed to say no. I didn't even realize
Yes.
that. It wouldn't have even
Yes.
come to my mind to be like, oh no, I'm going to set a boundary here. I'm going to step in here. I didn't even think it was something that I was allowed to do. And now it's very, very different. But that's because I've had all these little experiences that have showed me like, oh yeah, I know in my mind's eye now that Georgia actually would do that. She is capable of that. And some of that was storytelling where,
Yep.
you know, I would see my friends go through similar things and I'd be like, oh no, like we cannot stand for that. Like if it's for you, then no, like I'm going to go and talk to them and I'm going to do this. And, you know, if I'm protecting somebody else. But for me, that was like I guess the stepping stone to doing that for myself, which felt, you know, for whatever reason, so much harder than doing it for, you know, a valued friend.
You know, I value everything you said and you're doing, and especially that part, because it's something I've learned for myself, and I use it now with clients, that no is a complete sentence. And when people try to make you shift your opinion, like people ask me to do stuff all the time, and when I say no, they're like, "Oh, but you're so great." I'm like, "No, no, don't manipulate me." "Oh, well, oh, you could do this." I'm like, "Yeah, why don't you accept my no like you would be grateful for my yes?" So that right there is you're not respecting my personage. So if I'm only there to serve you and your desires, we now have a problem, and you're showing who you are, and I have a problem with that. And then transitioning that, because like you, I had to learn how to say no, because, you know, growing up in an abusive household, on the outside, everything looked awesome. Like my family had money, although my brother and myself, we had to fight for stuff, but we looked like we were affluent and all these things. And it was very difficult. And I wanted to belong. So I was very performative. So if anybody wanted anything to be done, I was yes, 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 yes. And I was exhausted. It was just like, okay, is this what life is? And well, yeah, it's what life is because that's what I knew it to be. And I knew that it was wrong, but just because I knew it was wrong didn't mean I knew what was correct and or right. So it's learning, like with those micro successes, those little no's that build into those bigger no's. And then it's like, oh, like I N-O because I K-N-O-W, I now know better, you know, and it's hard. But if you look at yourself as a friend, and this is something I started to do when I've been journaling too, and it's been like years now, but I look at myself and I call myself friend, and I'm like, okay, friend, do we really want to do this? And then sometimes, you know, that's learning your voice. And like, I'll feel like that jumbly pit in my stomach. I'm like, okay, what's going on, friend? What's going on? And it's talking to yourself, because we have been in martial arts, we have conditioning, right? Various conditioning practices. Us saying yes often, that's a conditioning practice too. So us reconditioning our condition is recognizing, no, I'm a person and I have needs, and it's okay for me to have needs. And it's okay for me to say no. And for all of us who like to just go out and do a lot of things, like, you know, you don't have to. You can sit in your chair and watch a movie and say no to everybody asking you for stuff. And it might seem selfish, but selfish is different from self-fulfillment. Selfish is only a portion of yourself. Self-full is living within the fullness of you. And sometimes that fullness of you needs rest. So you can say no, and it's okay. And the friend in you will thank you for it. Oh my gosh. And you'll make mistakes, but the people who love you, they see you. And they're like, okay, maybe a bit of an overcorrection, but that's okay. It's better to overcorrect than not correct at all. It's reconditioning.
Yes. Oh, I love so much of all of this conversation. And we didn't even get to talking about your dissertation yet. So you've been, you know, doing martial arts, you've been doing what I would call art therapy. I'm not sure if you call it art therapy. And here now you are doing your doctoral thesis. So what has your academic journey been like, and what are you researching?
Oh my goodness, Georgia. I never thought I would be pursuing any of what I'm doing. So I've had 6 surgeries in 8 years. And I am just convinced that if you don't deal with the traumas and pains, it internalizes in your body and it manifests into some type of dis-ease, because that dis-ease it has nowhere to go. So it affects your organs. It just attaches somewhere. So I had the uncomfortable issues of, hopefully this is not going to gross out your audience. I was bleeding a lot, and I had doctors tell me that it was all in my head. And I'm like, yeah, I can assure you that it's not. And if you want, I can give you a physical demonstration of how it's not. Where I moved, they honored that something was wrong, but they also didn't know. So this has been like years of trying to figure out. And then I've had these surgeries, and luckily I moved to a state where the healthcare is better, and the doctors are actually willing to listen. But it took off so much time. So I had to actually start to question, well, because I had my ovaries removed, and I had to figure out, well, what does it mean to be a woman? And then that actually brought me into the conversation of gender versus sexuality. And so it had me thinking about things, but also led me to art therapy. And I didn't know that this was even a field. And I played this game anytime I was going to doctor's offices, which was at that time 2 to 3 times a week. How many magazines can I read? So I generally get through 2 magazines. And in one of them, WebMD, was art therapy. I'm like, oh my goodness, mine, wow, this is a thing. I get better. This is what I'm going to do. So I returned back to school, and I decided I'm going to do this. And then I love my classes, but I was like, yeah, I don't want to do this. I want to do this. I want to do something else. So I started my own nonprofit, and it's My Care Initiative, Community Arts Research Education. And I knew that I wanted to use art to help people, but I also wanted to do some other things in community. So that led to me getting my master's. So it's theatrical education as a specialization with abuse trauma, and being able to help in that way. But then martial arts just never left. As much as I tried to like scrub it off, it wouldn't leave me alone, Georgia. It's like, oh my gosh, why don't you just go? It's like, no, we're here. So anytime I could talk about martial arts, I would. And anytime I would be around martial artists, it was like, okay. And then this doctoral path was literally like, how can I connect neuroscience and story and being able to help people? And that's transitioned to metacognition, and helping people look at their thoughts and the stories that they create using martial arts and breaking to be able to help people break down the binary stories and the societal stigmas, and how do we then be able to work together. And yeah, I'm in my 3rd year, and this is research year and field research, and I'm excited and nervous. But this is what it is.
So what is the research going to involve? Are you going to do research about the board breaking specifically? Please tell me it's going to be that.
I'm incorporating board breaking. I'm creating my own pedagogy, which is really like, oh, okay, but we're doing this. And Dr. Jennings, oh my gosh. And so many people that I met at these conferences, they're like, we're here for you. How do we, and I'm like, I don't know, but I'm going to be calling on you. But what I want to do, what I want to do is I want to have conversations with women martial artists. And I think that, and I'm curious what your thoughts. I think that women are starting to be recognized as whole beings in martial arts, but at least largely, but not in its entirety. I think women are often associated in martial arts as being hypersexualized and like a partner to the man. And being a partner with a man is not a problem. The problem is when we're taking the backseat continuously and we're not recognized as whole beings, as who we are. So I'm seeing that there's a shift, but I'm also seeing that that shift is not happening as quickly as I think it should. So I think that having the conversation about why trauma responsive and talking to trauma sensitive, trauma informed, and trauma aware martial artists who are largely women, I want to get their stories. So it's more of an auto phenomenal. Oh my, I can't even say it now. Auto, an auto ethnographic, but also phenomenology connector there, and sharing why this is important, because this is healthcare, but it's also wellness. And I think if we're discounted as being a viable resource for mental health advocacy and allies, that messes up with how we can serve in our communities. Financial, a lot of martial artists are often, oh, you're only at it for money. But I'm like, well, we've got to reframe that. People have bills they have to pay. I mean, this is what it is, but it's also a service. So why not have martial artists who are especially doing this within that specialization, pay them so then they can continue to serve. So these stories, I'm hoping to be able to advocate with that, and using theatrical education to be able to show different segments by vignettes, and have some audience participation. So that's where participatory action research is going to be connected. And I want engagement and also be able to serve. So that's what is projected. You'll be informed for sure.
And I want to help however I can. If I can connect you to folks within my network, then I absolutely will. Other women and non-binary people as well. And there's some wonderful non-binary folk doing work in this space. And men too. When I have when the he hims reach out to me and they're like, can I be involved in this space? I am so grateful to all men who are just like comfortable enough to know that, like, I'm going to ask you your pronouns straight up at the top of my form, and that's a really good litmus test for who is the kind of person that I want to work with in this space. And the conversations that I'm having more recently, actually, where the men are coming out of the works to do this work is so needed. And I'm so grateful to all of the people who are wanting to do work in the trauma-informed space. Your work is going to be incredible. I am so excited to see this. I don't 100% understand the theater piece, but I'm like so intrigued. I want to know more about like what that area of study, what that area of practice even looks and feels like. But yeah, I'm very here to learn more, basically.
Yeah, we're trying to get you here. I really do have some ideas, so.
Oh yeah, this will be offline conversations. Don't worry to everybody listening. I always drop all these teasers where I'm like, oh, I'm going to be connecting this person to this person soon, and we're going to be bringing this other work in. So yeah, there are just so many great people now. Like when I hosted the conference that George probably told you about 2 years ago now, that was 20 people, and that was like all of the practitioners and researchers in the space that I could find. And I would say that number's probably tripled now since we did that work. And that's just ones that like I'm aware of. Every time I do a podcast interview or I meet a new researcher or I meet a new person, and they'll introduce me to somebody else. And it's just so wonderful to hear all the ways that we are approaching this space, that we, borrowing from each other's ideas, and how collaborative that the trauma-informed space is. Like you said earlier, I'm not sure if it was online or offline, but how you said that, like, you reached out to 32 people and you only had one negative response. That really has been my experience as well, where there have been a few people who think that they're going to trademark the idea of trauma-informed martial arts and don't want to collaborate. But by and large, everybody has been so willing to share their ideas, to, donate their time, to have conversations, to collaborate. And I think that that's what's needed if we're going to, get recognition from governing bodies, which is my life's mission, basically, is to be like, government, pay us so that we can give this work. We can share this work with the folks who do not have the capacity to do so, because you're investing so much money in areas that are clearly, not working, or in
Right.
isolation that they're not working. We just need to look at society as being very complex and therefore offering a multitude of solutions. And I think that trauma-informed martial arts is a piece of that puzzle.
It's so amazing you just said that, because it comes right back to martial arts, right? It's just like, because there's so many different types and disciplines of martial arts, it stifles, I hope, continuously, which martial art is the best. It's like, well, no, which martial art is the best for you? And much like many of us are experiencing in our lives, you may not just have one job in your life. You may actually have several types of jobs. Some are going to be better suited. Some are going to be better suited at that time that you're in. So it doesn't mean, and some you're just going to actually love, so that's great. But it doesn't mean that one has to be better in martial arts. It doesn't mean that one has to be better than another person's. And I think that us in this space of being able to show up, you show other people how to also then operate in healthier ways. So that's why I really believe in this. And it's so, something you said, I think, oh my gosh, it's so true. It's sad, but it's true that you have so many people who are like, oh, I'm going to trademark this as my own. Like, well, that sounds like a lot of fear. And it sounds like you're operating out of lack. Because really, the core of creativity is not, oh, I see what you're doing, I'm going to steal what you're doing. It's, oh, I'm inspired what you're doing, and I'm going to thus now create my own. So it's like this constant thread that you can see, oh, well, it's like these building blocks in this thread of this person did this and I took from this, but I'm also I'm citing this person because they have excited the inner me to be able to do other things. So it's like anybody who's like, oh, well, it's all mine. Like, yeah, that sounds like control and dealing out of lack there, buddy. Let's do some inner work.
Yes, right. Oh my goodness. And at the end of the day, it doesn't serve anybody either, because this train is rolling already. Whether or not you want to try and build your own track or just get on the train is totally up to you. But with every single person that jumps on board, it's picking up momentum. And like you said, there are so many different martial arts, and people ask me that a lot. Which is the best martial art to do if I've experienced trauma, or which is the best martial art for whatever? And I can't give you an answer, because it really depends on the instructor. It depends on you as a person, and it depends on the culture of the gym that you're training at, or the dojo, however you want to say it. And that's where I think it's such an exciting opportunity to build up both academically and also in practice, and continuously bridge that gap between academics and practice. Some founding principles around what do we agree upon, not what in what ways are we different and in what ways do we disagree, but what are the core things that we actually agree on? Because martial arts are, by and large, whether or not they have a governing body who does regulate, for example, the syllabus required for each belt, or, like an example is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has no governing body that dictates this is what a blue belt is, this is what a purple belt is, etc. It's totally up to individual interpretation by each black belt. So we don't have any kind of standardization across the board, but what we can have is a worldwide network of people across martial arts who are going to stand up and say, first of all, I'm going to protect my students. That's first and foremost. There is a huge power disparity between coaches and students. And we always need to really be mindful of our positions of power as facilitators and the potential for abuse, whether it is deliberate or not. And the first thing to think about is whether or not instructors within your space are abusing their position of power. And thinking about, like you said, the types of people who are often drawn to training in martial arts, it's in response to something that they've experienced, which unfortunately does make you more susceptible to, abuse. And so first of all, re-victimization.
Yes, we
need to try and create spaces that again, while we can never promise safety, we need to try and do everything we can to move towards safety, to create safer spaces, safe enough spaces that people can exist within them and just focus on their personal growth and their training instead
Oh
of
my gosh,
defending
yes.
themselves from, advances and abuse. And if we can create principles around that, even if we did that as the trauma-informed martial arts community, to me, that would be a huge step up. And we're seeing stories, across the world currently of ways that those systems are not being upheld within traditional martial arts settings. That's first and foremost. And then what can we build, again, to move away from pain and towards that beautiful, joyful, pleasurable martial arts movement? If we have those principles shared around the world, that's a different world to me. That right there, that's a
Absolutely.
changed world.
Oh my gosh, I love everything you just said, and I really. My breaking coach, Master Zambri, also the person I heard who was making all those noises that brought me to breaking, he is an advocate, and he's someone that I feel safe around. And he is one of those people that you were just talking about. I didn't always have a lot of those people, but he is one who, how can I show up? What do you need? What does this look like? And it's being able to support him and others who want to, and also like what you were saying, like these spaces, like there's a karate instructor, excuse me, sensei. Oh my goodness, I can see him looking at me like, that's not what my title is. I'm sorry, sir. Master Marcelo Vieiro. He uses martial arts and social justice to be able to have peace and harmony in his training spaces, but he also goes into the community. And so I just bring those up because I think it's important for us to not box in martial arts. Like it has to only look at like this and has to only be applied like this. An attorney friend in Florida, Orlando, Florida, Roger Scott, he has trained in Taekwondo and Muay Thai, and he's an attorney and he applies the principles there because it's like, we can't just be so confined to our training centers and spaces, but we also need to make sure that our training centers and spaces are safe. And that includes emotional safety. So yes to everything you just said and more.
We could truly do a 3-hour podcast, but I want to be really mindful of your energy and also the energy of our audience at listening to us. If folks would like us to do another episode, you can comment on the YouTube video or reach out to me via the website and just let us know if there are other topics you'd like us to discuss. But obviously, this is not going to be the end of this beautiful blossoming friendship. And I want to put things back to you for the last sentiments. Is there anything that you would like to share with folks before we talk about how they can get in touch with you, which is, of course, critical?
Talking to you is very easy. It didn't even feel like an hour. So, oh my goodness, that's awesome. That's not the experience with many situations. I want people to remember that your voice is needed, please. And please, even if it may seem like it's silly or insignificant, if you are feeling bothered, trauma, like just not something is sitting well with you, it's okay to acknowledge that. Sometimes I think we just diminish our intuition because, oh, what if I'm wrong? And if you're wrong, then you're wrong and you learn. So I share that as a request from somebody you don't know, but who does absolutely care about healing and wanting wellness for everyone, because wellness for everyone means that we have a healthier world, that you listen to your voice and hug your inner friend. Like that might sound corny and I get it, but we can be friends to ourselves. And when we actually connect with that friend part, we want to do right by that friend. So I just put that out there to you as a martial artist, as a person who definitely believes in healing and growth. Embrace that inner friend of yours and protect that, and you're going to be okay. And thank you, Georgia, for what you're doing.
Always. Kenisha, how can folks reach out to you online?
Well, friends, I laugh because I do get back eventually, but sometimes it'll take like a day or so. You can feel free to stop by our website. We're updating, but the information is still there. You can see things that we've been doing throughout the years. mycareinitiative.org, and emails are on the website. You can connect with me via social media. I am being so intentional, everyone, because I haven't really been on social media a lot. I know it's weird, but that's what it is. So you can look up Right One KC, or you can look up Breakthrough Silence and My Care Initiative. And we are on social media via Facebook as well as Instagram. And you can email me, and that's probably kind of the fastest way to connect with me. So it's kc@mycareinitiative.org.
I love it.
To reach out to you.
Yes, we'll put all of those details in the show notes. So if you'd like to reach out with Kenisha, then you can do that via those links.
Thank you for being part of the club. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to get in touch, please refer to the information in the show notes. If you'd like to support this podcast, please consider leaving us a review or subscribing on whichever platforms you use to listen or watch the podcast. The Conscious Combat Club acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands in which we work, live and play. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. We'd like to say thank you to Nari for the beautiful song Shape Me, heard at the beginning and end of every episode. If you'd like to connect with Nari, you can find her on Instagram @Nari.
Nobody shapes me but me. Don't gotta tell you what my name is, I don't gotta explain it. Walk in the room, hear a boom erupting like I'm famous. I'm here shedding shells, I'm shameless. I fear nothing, no complacence. Walk too many tight ropes with no hope, so I became this poster they hold over all the heads of trauma holders. You don't need to know my history, I move boulders. Atlas shrug, cause I lifted the weight above his shoulders. No pretense of defense, move first like chess soldiers. This goes deeper than empowerment, cause I'm the one that power it. Physical meets mental, challenge me to keep devouring. If I can't change the scenery, at least I change perspectives. No longer isolated, but elevated and selective. Darkest places become beautiful spaces. This is where rage meets patience, meets power meets gracious. Meets, we're so glad you came, and the feeling is contagious. When you the walking impact of intended bad intentions. When you the manifesting of collecting all they tensions. You the soul and body, hold it all and still remember. But I'm a work in progress, testament to all contenders. Forgot what it was like to have control over self. Forgot what it was like to be the one in charge. Forgot in my reflection I could see all my wealth. Forgot that with my bare hands I break all these bars, barriers and obstacles. They can't cage me, they can't chronicle all my experiences and reduce them to appearances. When I was truly beaten, gave myself clearances to fall down, mess up, and get myself back up. I'm not looking for clovers cause I don't believe in luck. Damn, you were badass, I heard them say it clearly. Why thank you very much, I know now I'm not weary of what's next for me. Cause I expect to see growth like I was planted, watered, fed, and bloomed to be. The positivity and accountability, knowing they won't step if I'm the agent of my agency. I think I found my voice again, huh? I think I found my voice again, huh? I'm not sorry, you're the end where I begin. Boundaries, I know them well, take a breath and meditate. Who is she? I know her well, now I get to open gates. 1, 2, 1, 2, I don't need your permission. And if you get uncomfortable, then use your intuition to know that I won't stay where respect is ever missing. And everything I do, that's me making decisions. It's truly underrated, the value of self-worth. Forgot that I was rich from the moment of my birth. A penny for my thoughts, no really, you can't afford it. You cannot buy my story, rewrite it, or record it. You cannot buy my story, rewrite it, or record it, huh?